Hello, I'm Kenneth Gravois. I work for the LSU Ag Center at the Sugar Research Station, which is located in St. Gabriel, Louisiana. I grew up on a sugarcane farm in St. James Parish, and my family still farms. I went the route of research, and now I'm the sugarcane specialist for the state of Louisiana. So if you were to talk to somebody and they would ask you, what are the major crops in the United States? If you did a little bit of research, you'd find out that you would find corn to be a major crop, grown on 80 to 90 million acres in the U.S. You'd find soybeans, a major crop, again, grown on the same amount of acres. But if you ask that same question here in Louisiana, you'd get a different answer. Sugarcane is our #1 valued row crop here in the state, and it's grown on about 500,000 acres. So how did sugarcane make its way into Louisiana? And really, the early history of Louisiana and the introduction of sugarcane go hand in hand. So let me tell a little bit of that story. If you go back to the early explorers, let's go all the way back to 1682. The explorer La Salle was commissioned by the French government to canoe and paddle down the Mississippi River. He left what is present-day Fort Wayne, Indiana, and he and his party took a canoe all the way down past present-day New Orleans to what is about the area of Venice. While there, he erected a cross and laid down 2 plaques, and he claimed all the lands drained by the Mississippi River for France. And he wrote a little note in his journal. He said, a port or two here would give us control of the whole continent. So that's really the beginning of the exploration of Louisiana. Not a lot happened in the interim, and finally in the late 1690s, the French wanted to reestablish their claim on Louisiana. You had the Spanish in Texas and the Spanish in Florida. You had the English in the Northeast, so they had to reestablish their claim, and they sent Iberville to travel up the Mississippi River. So he got lucky. He left the West Indies, he left the Gulf Coast of Mississippi and Alabama, found the mouth of the river, and went as far north as Point Coupee Parish today, or West Baton Rouge Parish, which is where we are today. And on the way back, they set up a small settlement in present-day New Orleans, and he is likely the first one that introduced sugarcane into Louisiana. He probably picked up that sugarcane from the West Indies in the Caribbean, and there were probably several successful and unsuccessful introductions of sugarcane into Louisiana. Well, what could you do with sugarcane? You could grow it, you could have a stalk, you could chew it, but you know, the juice doesn't really keep if you put it on the shelf. There really wasn't a sustained production until 1751. And that's when you had the settlement of New Orleans in its early stages of development, and the Jesuit priests were the first to sustain production of sugarcane in Louisiana. What we now consider the central business district of downtown New Orleans was called the Jesuit Plantation. They grew tobacco, they grew sugarcane, they grew citrus, many of the crops that would sustain a city like New Orleans in the day. Again, you could grow it, you might chew it for the juice, you might boil it down for syrup, but it had a very short shelf life. So let's fast forward to 1795, and you had the sugar planter Etienne Desbarres, who had a plantation in what is now Audubon Park, Carrollton Plantation in New Orleans. He and his right-hand man from the island of Haiti, Moran, were the first to granulate sugar. Why is it important to granulate sugar? Because granulated or brown sugar has a shelf life. It can keep for a year to a year and a half. That's very important for the commercial production of sugarcane. Well, he bet the farm quite literally on all of his acres going into sugarcane, and he harvested his first crop, and he and Morin granulated the first sugar cane, and it quite literally changed the fortunes of Louisiana. In 1806, there's an interesting letter from Governor William Claiborne, and he's writing a letter back to President Thomas Jefferson, and he's commenting on the State of the Union. Jefferson had just purchased Louisiana from the government of France, and he's reporting on the state of the economy. And Governor Claiborne makes the statement, "It is absolutely amazing how quickly the local planters have amassed wealth due to the sugar culture here in Louisiana. Think about a bland diet and what a little bit of sugar would do to improve the diet of the people in the United States." Now, it's unfortunate that most of the wealth accumulated during this time was amassed on the back of the institution of slavery. So a war was fought to right a wrong, and the industry had to sustain itself after the Civil War. And what's interesting to me as a scientist is they were astute enough to realize that they needed science to find their way out of the throes of the Civil War and the effect it had on the economy. In 1877, all the local planters grouped together and formed the Louisiana Sugar Planters Association because they realized what they couldn't do individually, they could do together as a group. And one of their first meetings, they knew that they needed science because you had a sugar beet industry in Europe that was thriving, and they were ahead of the game on scientific discovery. They knew they needed a sugar experiment station, and they collected $100 dues from each of the local planters, and they formed in Kenner, Louisiana, the Louisiana Sugar Experiment Station. What I really think is pretty cool about that is that in 1887, 2 years later, there was federal legislation called the Hatch Act that established an agricultural research station in each state of the United States. Well, that research station folded into the State Experiment Station. That's the forerunner of the Louisiana Agricultural Center, which is where I work at LSU. So they now had science on their side. Sugarcane varieties will make or break every industry. Oftentimes you'll hear people say, new varieties are the lifeblood of the Louisiana sugar industry. It's true today, it was true in 1885. So what they did was they started collecting varieties from around the world. The USDA had consulates, that's the United States Department of Agriculture, in all these foreign countries in the tropics. And they would collect stalks of sugarcane and send them to the experiment station in Audubon Park. And they would test these varieties and see if they were adapted to Louisiana. Now, it's pretty hard to consider Louisiana a tropical climate. Sugarcane is a tropical grass, no two ways about it. And Louisiana is a temperate climate. So to find varieties uniquely adapted to Louisiana is kind of a tough task, but that was one of the big goals of the experiment station back then. So they found varieties like Louisiana Striped, Louisiana Purple that were adapted to Louisiana. In the 1920s, there were huge disease epidemics that established in sugarcane in Louisiana. Again, the role of science and the institutions of science had to expand. It's really interesting. In the middle of the Civil War, the country still had the wherewithal to establish the USDA, the Department of Agriculture. You know, we were an agrarian society and we needed research. And what they would do is send people out from Washington, D.C. to the local ag industries and find out what the problems were, take them back to Washington and research. But the USDA folks in Washington always encouraged the use and the implementation of ag research at a local level. And that really finally came together in the early 1920s. The Louisiana Sugar Planters Association became the American Sugarcane League. They're the grower and processor group for the Louisiana sugar industry. They're still an entity today, and you always had LSU with an agricultural research station. And now the USDA established a local experiment station in what is now Houma, Louisiana. So we call it the three-legged stool, a local industry and stakeholder group organized by the American Sugarcane League, LSU, now the LSU Ag Center, with a statewide effort in research and a federal effort through the United States Department of Agriculture. Well, they solved the problem of the disease epidemics. They started their own sugarcane breeding and variety development program, and it's the program that operates today. So what kind of effect does research have? Well, today our sugar yields are in the neighborhood of 8,000 pounds of sugar per acre. If I have an acre of sugarcane, that's 208 feet by 208 feet, we can get 8,000 pounds. That's a lot of teaspoons for a cup of coffee. 50 years ago, our average yields were around 4,000 pounds. So we have doubled the yield of sugar per acre in Louisiana in the last 50 years. That's what research, that's what getting that information out to the local growers does for our industry. Again, I've always been a part of the Louisiana sugar industry, having grown up in it. It's fun to do the research work that supports it. It's an economic driver for rural South Louisiana. When you turn those dollars on the farm and raw sugar factory over in the economy, the economists tell us that has a $3 billion effect on the rural South Louisiana economy. So it's a big part of our economy. It's the #1 valued row crop, and we're here to keep sustainable sugar production in Louisiana going. So appreciate your attention, and good to be with you.